Cześć, nazywam się Radek Orszewski i zapraszam Was na podcast Kanban przy kawie. Cześć, miło, że słuchacie kolejnego, 24 już odcinka podcastu Kanban przy kawie. Dzisiaj odcinek trochę nietypowy, dlatego że z jednej strony odcinek z wywiadem, z drugiej strony odcinek z wywiadem z osobą, która już kiedyś występowała w Kanbanie przy kawie i będzie mówiła na temat, który też już w Kanbanie przy kawie poruszaliśmy, ale opowiadała wówczas o nim zupełnie inna osoba. No więc rozwikłajmy tą tajemnicę. CSI Kanban. Dzisiejszym tematem jest Kanban Maturity Model, model dojrzałości, który jest wbrew nazwie modelem dojrzałości organizacji. Będzie o nim opowiadał nikt inny jak David Anderson, a więc pionier, twórca metody Kanban, współautor koncepcji KMM, współautor razem z Teodorą Bożewą. I jeśli może słuchacie tego podcastu już od tak dawna, albo jesteście zainteresowani, to warto cofnąć się gdzieś do grudnia, dokładnie 2019 roku, kiedy to opublikowałem pierwszy odcinek poświęcony KMM, właśnie wywiad z Teodorą, w którym Teodora opowiadała zarówno o korzeniach, ale też można powiedzieć o takiej mechanice konstrukcji tego modelu. Minął rok od publikacji tamtego wywiadu, troszkę więcej od jego nagrania. Od niedawna mamy na świecie, można powiedzieć, a w świadku kanbanowym jest to duże wydarzenie, nową wersję tego modelu. Wersja tego modelu to jest wersja 1.2, natomiast jest jednocześnie druga papierowa edycja książki opisującej ten model. No i o ile te nazwy, te numerki, można powiedzieć, nie świadczą o dużych zmianach, o tyle ci, którzy widzieli może takie zdjęcie ilustrujące grubość tej książki wydanej przed już 1,5 roku, a tej nowej teraz, można powiedzieć, jesienno-zimowej książki, no, mogą się zaskoczyć. Ta książka, nie mierzyłem dokładnie, ale nie wiem, podwoiła się na pewno w swojej objętości, ponieważ no, ten model uległ, można powiedzieć, ewolucji, całkiem sporemu rozrostowi. Zaprosiłem do podcastu Davida i poprosiłem go o to, żeby opowiedział nam troszkę o tym, jaki jest, można powiedzieć, klucz używania tego. Nie będzie to klucz w takim znaczeniu, na której stronie otworzyć tą książkę, ale David opowiada o bardzo ciekawej kwestii, o tym, jak różni ludzie w różnych kulturach, czy w organizacjach o różnych kulturach, można powiedzieć, odważają się albo boją się poszukiwać różnego rodzaju inspiracji do eksperymentów, zmian, w zależności właśnie od tego, jak dojrzała jest nasza organizacja, jak cierpliwa jest nasza organizacja, jak wybaczająca, można powiedzieć, pewne potknięcia, pewną naukę, którą wyciągamy z tego, że no właśnie, jakiś eksperyment, jakaś zmiana, jakaś praktyka, którą może próbujemy wprowadzić, nie do końca, mówiąc kolokwialnie, kliknęła. W tym odcinku David opowiada o tym wszystkim, opowiada też właśnie może o tej, na koniec można powiedzieć, takiej delcie pomiędzy starą a nową wersją książki, bo pojawiły się pytania kierowane do mnie, czy warto tą książkę kupić, to jednak jest tam kilkadziesiąt euro, ale słuchajcie, jest też jedna bardzo ciekawa rzecz, tej nowej premierze tego nowego modelu, nowej wersji modelu towarzyszy coś takiego jak KMM Plus, a więc KMM Plus, można powiedzieć, model w postaci, chciałoby się powiedzieć, elektronicznej książki, no może tak, pewnego rodzaju, można powiedzieć, aplikacji webowej, w której jesteśmy znaleźć w stanie treść tej książki i to w taki bardzo interaktywny sposób. No właśnie, czy Kanban Maturity Model w wersji KMM Plus jest takim właśnie przewodnikiem autostopowicza po nie galaktyce, ale modelu i całym, można powiedzieć, świadku kanbanowym, będziecie mieli okazję przekonać się sami, a przynajmniej niektórzy z Was, dlatego że ta aplikacja KMM Plus jest dostępna już online oraz, uwaga, będziecie mogli wygrać dostęp do niej, pełen dostęp, no ale słuchajcie, o tym na sam koniec podcastu, tak żeby, wiecie, rozgrzać emocje, co trzeba zrobić, kto ma szansę, co dostanie, o tym na końcu. Zapraszam tymczasem do wywiadu z Davidem. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Radek.
I'm happy to say that David is back with us. If you remember, he was the guest at the very first episode of our podcast. Today, we're going to talk about something that you've already heard about. So also some months ago, you heard our interview with Teodora Bożewa about the Kanban Maturity Model. If you pay attention to what is going on in the Kanban community, KMM is back. KMM is back in a totally, I would say, different shape, because the volume of the book is bigger. There's a new book, I haven't mentioned that, and there are some other things related to Kanban Maturity Model. Today, David is my guest because I wanted to ask him, as one of the co-authors of the book, what's in there, what's new, because we could see from some pictures that the volume of the books is very much different, and what else is around KMM. David, I don't think we need to introduce you because you're already known to the audience of this podcast. So maybe let's start with KMM as such, right? We heard Theodora's points some months ago talking about the origin of it, but assuming that there are listeners who maybe only read about it or even not heard about it at all. Starting with why. What is Kanban Maturity Model and how it can help? Who should look for it?
Well, thank you for having me on again, Radek. It's nice to be here. Thank you to everyone who's listening. We've been doing this Kanban thing about 16 years now, since we kicked off the first one at Microsoft in the IT department, just one service. And over those 16 years, we have seen that many different companies and people around the world, from small businesses to very large ones, they have implemented Kanban differently. Their implementations are really quite diverse. Mm-hmm. And in part that's because the guidance on Kanban was really a set of principles and very general or abstract practices, like you should limit your work in progress. Right. Well, that's a good principle, but people can take that and they can implement it in different ways in their organization, ways that are meaningful to them. Mm-hmm. For example, do you limit the number of items that someone is doing individually, or the number of items that a team is doing, or the number of items in an entire service delivery workflow, or a project, or whatever it might be. So we saw this incredible diversity of implementations, and this created a really interesting challenge, because most people would prefer just to be told what to do, which practices to implement, and exactly how to implement them. And if anyone ever challenges them about what they're doing, they point to an authority figure, whether it's a book or a published author, some leader like me, and they say, well, I'm doing it this way because David told me to do it this way, or David's book told me to do it this way. And the Kanban method's never really been about that. It's been about the concept that your context is really unique to your business. In fact, if that wasn't true, then someone else would be doing exactly what you're doing. Your business would be undifferentiated. You would be in a vicious cycle of chasing the lowest cost all the time. And the customers would struggle to choose between you and any other business that they might choose to work with. And of course, that does happen with some companies. They get stuck in a position where they're not unique in any way, and they really struggle. But for the vast majority of the people we meet, there is something unique about their circumstances, the risks that they're managing, or the environment they're working in, the regulations perhaps that constrain them, and so forth. So the Kanban method was all about this concept of your context is unique, learn to evolve your processes so that they are as fit as they can be for the environment that you're living in. And the unique thing about Kanban was the evolutionary approach, where the historical approach in software development methodologies was the concept of tailoring, a great big thick catalogue of many different practices, and then some advice from an expert who would help you choose the practices and tailor them to your context. And that history hadn't been terribly successful because these process catalogues were often very thick, 15,000 pages. In fact, Accenture's predecessor, Anderson Consulting, they had a process manual over 100,000 pages thick. So if you hired an Anderson Consulting consultant, their job was to come along and help you tailor down the 100,000 plus pages to maybe 300 pages of guidance that your organization would use. And that approach hadn't been terribly successful. So the idea that you have a business, it operates, you do some things quite well, you do other things not so good, you'd like to improve. Well, let's just start with what you do now and figure out the things which are working and leave them alone, and look at the things which are not working so well and evolve. So that's fantastic guidance, but it leaves people in this psychological position of they had to make their own decisions. They had to take responsibility, and they may well be held accountable for those decisions, those changes they're making. And for many people perhaps listening to this podcast, they'll recognize that that's scary, that perhaps they work in an organization where they don't feel terribly safe. It's not particularly supportive of experimentation. And if you make a change, it's fantastic if it's really an improvement and you'll be rewarded for that. But if you make a change which turns out not to work so well, you may well be punished. Mm-hmm. And without the very prescriptive type of guidance where someone can point at the authority figure of a book or a published author and say, I'm doing it this way because David told me to do it, then it creates inertia. They don't want to take their own initiative, make their own decisions. Yeah, people don't want to make their own decisions, to take responsibility, to be held accountable, because they're fearful of the consequences.
Right. So they like to delegate it to authors or books or external bodies. Yeah.
So you see how this leaves the world in an interesting dilemma, that you can either follow prescriptive guidance, which was written without context, or at least without your context. Mm-hmm. And that gives you the excuse of saying, I'm doing this because this book, this author, this expert told me to do it. Mm-hmm. But it's advice which was written out of context. And that's actually quite dangerous, because your circumstances are different and unique. And how could I possibly know the risks that you're dealing with and the culture and the environment that you're coping with? So, and the alternative is this evolutionary approach of start with what you do now and make changes. And hopefully with some of the guidance we've provided, those changes are improvements. But people are afraid to do that because they're afraid of being punished if it's not an improvement. Mm-hmm. So actually, we're in the historical position of just follow the prescriptive guidance that's in some book that's written out of context. And then this new innovation, if you like, that we introduced about 15 years ago of evolutionary improvements. Neither of these are terribly good solutions, it turns out. Because unless you're in a very high trust culture, there's fear of being punished for making changes without the ability to redirect to an authority figure that gave you permission. So the Kanban Maturity Model really started out as a very ambitious project to somehow catalogue this incredibly diverse ecosystem of Kanban implementations, put some model or architecture framework around this diversity in order to provide somewhat more prescriptive guidance, that there is very specific guidance on how do you interpret the organizational maturity of your organization, and how do you interpret the culture of your organization, and given its maturity, and maturity refers to things like the resilience of the organization, the level of patience, and the quality of the risk management, the quality of the decision making from the leadership, the quality of the leadership for that matter. So how do you interpret your organizational maturity and your culture, and then what would be an appropriate style of Kanban implementation? And it turned out that we were able to correlate different styles of Kanban implementation with different levels of organizational maturity and organizational cultures. And 5 years ago, while that might have been the vision for the Kanban Maturity Model, to be honest, I didn't think that was it was possible to that. What we did with the first release, the KMM, actually the first book, the first edition book, was based on the beta release. And I thought, maybe this is about as good as we can get. We can describe organizational maturity levels, and we can show a correlation of Kanban implementations to that, practice mapping to the maturity levels, and that's pretty good. So we launched the book. We had an official beta program that ran for a year with a number of companies in 2 or 3 continents, some small, some big companies. Between 6 and 12 were involved, some more intensely than others. Some produced case studies, others haven't done so yet. And that enabled us to develop the 1.0 release of KMM, but we weren't quite ready to produce a second book at that time. Then there was a minor epiphany. We had struggled with where would you describe or place the implementation of roles in the Kanban method, roles like the delivery manager role or the request manager role, or a more degenerate form of that we call the flow manager. Where would they go? And we had the epiphany of how to add them to the model. And it wasn't a major change, but it was quite a significant additional concept being added, the concept of roles. So we bumped the revision number to 1.1, and that happened only 6 months after the 1.0 release. So still we didn't have the new book written. So in the end, with the publication of the second edition of the book, we bumped the version number to 1.2. And actually there's really significant changes in the model that justify bumping the version number. And the driver for all of that was my desire that it shouldn't just be a practice mapping manual, that instead the new book should become the textbook for both our Kanban Maturity Model training class and the Kanban coaching practices training class, and essentially the playbook for all Kanban coaching professionals. For some years, I had wanted to capture all the ideas that we were teaching in our coaching classes into a book. And I quite ambitiously pushed forward on writing the coaching content. So I was, if you like, quite indisciplined and bad to Theodora, because I completely moved the goalposts on the project. And that probably extended the project out by a few months while the extra chapters were written. But I'm sure if Theodora was here today, she would be the first telling you that she's really thrilled with all the changes in the model, and that she would never have believed we could have developed something so comprehensive and so incredibly internally consistent and congruent as we have in the end. So it's really been very worthwhile. And at this point, if I look back 5 years ago, this vision for what KMM needed to be, but I didn't think it was possible, I feel we've delivered that now. We have delivered, although it's about 1.5 inches or about 3.5 centimeters thick, 500-page book, which it will enable you to identify your own organization in there. You'll be able to find the organizational maturity that matches the one you're sitting in. You'll be able to find a description of the culture that matches the one that you're sitting in. You'll be able to map that to appropriate Kanban practices and then compare what are we doing with our Kanban compared to what the book says. Is there more we could be doing? We haven't done enough. Or are we actually overreaching? Are we trying to do practices we're not really ready for?
Yeah.
And in that sense, the new book, while 3 times thicker than the previous one, and that's very intimidating. There's a lot of information in there. It is immensely more useful for people, that they will be able to identify their context, their organizational maturity, the appropriate practices, and then tune their Kanban implementation to their current level of tolerance for process discipline, for metrics, for reporting, for transparency, and so on. And therefore, if their boss asks them, why are you doing this? They can now point at the book and say, because the KMM or because David and Theodora have told me to do it this way. So I feel the KMM book has really solved this dilemma that we had previously with either process tailoring from huge catalogs or having to grow your own and take your own responsibility and accountability. We found this magical middle ground after extensive experience. 15 years of experience have gone into this, not just from me or Theodora, but from a wider community, people that we teach, people we've consulted with, community members, case studies that have been captured either by ourselves or by other people, presentations, experience reports published, presented at conferences. Without all of that body of experience, we wouldn't have been able to build the model. But building the model and writing it down in a way that's consumable has taken 5 years. So it's something that took 15 years to bake and 5 years to bring to the market.
I can also say that
as a trainer and consultant, I see that the KMM has like a really big influence on everything that what we do in the Kanban ecosystem, right? Because, for example, in Kanban systems improvement class, also known as KMP2, we now show the evolution of cadences, which for me is like a big game changer, because like you were saying, very often people are coming and asking like, tell me what Kanban says about what kind of meetings or feedback loops we should have, right? And now we actually tell students, please like familiarize yourself with the KMM, even at the very basic level, to understand where you are. And then you're going to see what kind of meetings, what kind of cadences, who will be able to participate in them in order to avoid this overreaching, like you said, yeah? Because like very often people who are like change agents, they are like much more ambitious than the organization is ready for, yeah? And they push for something what doesn't have chances to succeed.
It's true, it's human nature that if somebody has a skill, they want to show off that skill. And if they feel they're paid to use a particular skill, they feel it's their duty to use it to the best of their ability. And that may encourage them to push an organization too fast, too soon. I think one of the truly important, although it's actually not new or unique, and I'll come to that in a moment, but really important concepts in the KMM is that at different levels, although we have to use a different number for a practice, a different number, a different title, it's often the same practice and the fidelity of that practice is improving. So, for example, a flow manager improves at the next level to either a request manager or a delivery manager. And the cadences, as you've mentioned, might start off as a team retrospective and then become a flow review. And then at the next level of maturity, it becomes the service delivery review.
SDR.
So we captured the idea that practices become more elaborate, and they often increase in their scope as the maturity level improves. Flow review, the name tells you what it does. It's focused on, are things flowing? But a delivery review also tells you what it does. Are we delivering things? And more than that, are we delivering against the promises that we've made? And therefore, where were those promises made? What commitments were made? What expectations did the customer have? Are we meeting the customer's expectations? And you can see from that there's a greater level of responsibility and accountability in are we managing delivery adequately versus are we just flowing adequately? However, having the ability, the capability to flow things effectively is clearly an enabler of the next level. So earlier I said that concept actually wasn't unique. That same concept existed in the CMM and the CMMI, for those who are familiar with the capability maturity model and software engineering processes. The project management practices in CMM, for example, were actually mapped over 3 or maybe even 4 levels of the model. And the idea was that at, say, maturity level 2, you had very rudimentary project management, but by level 4, you had quite quantitative risk management and very mathematical forecasting being used in your project management. So the idea that practices evolve and improve their fidelity as the organizational maturity improves wasn't a new concept. But for us, we identified that concept in KMM for Kanban practices, and we've exposed that in the KMM 1.2 in the second edition of the book. And I agree with you that the mapping of the cadences at different maturity levels, and we've introduced that into the KSI class, that really is a game changer. It enables us to define actually quite prescriptive Kanban method implementations for level 0, level 1, level 2, level 3. And that's a project for us to extract the material from the KMM and publish here's how you do Kanban at maturity level 1, here's how you do it at maturity level 2, and so forth. And that's also going to help people who are constrained by the tooling that they must use in their organization. If we've defined a much more prescriptive, here's a maturity level 1 Kanban or maturity level 2 Kanban, you can take your tracking software like Jira and you can build a template for level 1, for level 2, for level 3. Now, it's not the evolutionary change approach that we would desire. It's more of a stair-step sort of change.
Yeah.
But I believe that will happen in the next 1 to 2 years. You'll see organizations publishing Jira templates or plugins for prescriptive Kanban implementations at level 1, level 2, level 3, and so forth. And then that will be game changing for a lot of people who struggle with these very limited work tracking software.
Yeah, they are challenged with like, how do I do it with this tool, right? If it's not compatible to the practice or the level of practice.
That's a nice segue into, there's an entire chapter in the KMM book, chapter 19, on barriers to adoption. If we're a level 1 organization, what are the barriers to getting to level 2? And similarly for level 3 and level 4, we've captured all of that, we've codified it. And of course, inappropriate or constrained tooling is a major reason for struggling to get to the next level. So the book contains guidance. So earlier you asked, what's new in the second edition and KMM 1.2? Well, that's an example. We've included a whole chapter codifying recognized barriers between levels. The main changes are that the book is structured into the concept of the 3 pillars of the KMM, which are organizational, the outcomes and benefits you achieve of organizational maturity, organizational culture, and of course, practices, the practice map. The Kanban practices mapped at specific implementation levels. So those 3 pillars, and then all of that is glued together with the codification of managed evolutionary change. So we now have a section of the book on outcomes and benefits, a section on culture, a very thick section. It's somewhere in the region of 50 pages longer than the first edition, just the section on practices. The practice descriptions have all been completely rewritten and are much more extensive and deeper. Also, as we've gone through the last 2 years, we'd often be having a conversation and say, oh, where is that on the model? And then we'd look and go, oh, missed it. Okay, we have to add that one. So there are 20 to 30 additional practices that we recognized had been overlooked in the first edition. In the 4th section is about evolutionary change, managed evolution, and the combination of the section on culture, which is 4 chapters, and the section on managed evolution, which is 5 chapters, that amounts to a very great deal of our coaching playbook. It's a significant piece of the curriculum for Kanban coaches, whether they're KCPs, Kanban coaching professionals, or the higher level, the accredited Kanban consultants. Then the the appendices in the book are non-trivial. There's, I think, 7 of them altogether, including 4 chapters on some quite advanced concepts like understanding the mathematics of lead time distributions and understanding the mathematics of cost of delay and how cost of delay affects class of service, how it affects dependency management, and how to implement a good triage discipline. And those are really book chapters that belong in a book on enterprise services planning. But we felt it was necessary to include them in the KMM book because these are practices which are required if you're to achieve maturity level 4. And really, we believe that all businesses must aspire to at least maturity level 4. The reason for this is very simple. When you read the maturity level descriptions and you read the observable outcomes and benefits, you would realize that in your own personal life, you don't want to do business with maturity level 1 or 2 vendors.
Right.
Whether it's the dry cleaners you use or the pizza restaurant that you do takeout on Friday nights, you want a minimum of maturity level 3, which is that they deliver on their promises consistently. And what we've come to recognize is that maturity level 3 is an unstable condition. You could, for example, be running a business where, say I make pizzas and you buy pizza from me, Radek, and you love my pizza and you like coming to me every week and you tell all your friends you think we're fabulous. That sounds like I've got a great business, but actually I lose 50 cents on every pizza that I sell. How long can I maintain that wonderful market position? So maturity level 3 is we focused myopically on keeping the customer happy, and maturity level 4 is that we have a balance where we keep all the stakeholders happy, including the investors, the bankers, the regulatory authorities, and so on. And that we don't provide the best customer service possible without keeping the other things in balance. So maturity level 4 is sustainable.
Yeah, I was going to say that we, like, referring to Kanban agendas, right? We are talking about scenario of moving like beyond just service delivery to sustainability of the company.
Absolutely. So level 4 is where organizations should aspire to. And it was necessary to include these enterprise services planning practices on how to do good triage, how to properly assign classes of service, how to do dependency management, and at least provide the background proof of the mathematics. We don't need everyone who uses these techniques to know the mathematics, right? We've created a nice, simple little mobile application for calculating class of service, and the mathematics is hiding in the background in there. But we need to publish the mathematics somewhere so that they're open to public scrutiny and that people can see that we don't just make this crap up. That
it's not magic box, but there's an algorithm behind it, right?
It's not alchemy we're doing, it's science. And hence those additional chapters at the end of the book. So the big new pieces of the book are the entire section on culture, which was previously just at most a chapter, a bit less maybe. Then there's the entire section on evolutionary change and all of these appendix chapters, which describe in some detail and provide backgrounds for necessary practices to take maturity level 4. and everything else that's in there about organizational maturity levels and outcomes, benefits, and the specific practice descriptions, all of that has been completely rewritten since the first edition.
Yeah, I think that summarized really well the difference between the books. Like I said, some of the listeners of the podcast already asked me, like, Radek, what's the delta, what's the change between the version that I got, like, the previous paper book version and the current one. There are also like lots of posters, which are actually available for free from kanbanmaturitymodel.com if you haven't checked it. Some of them are already even localized. So these are how we could describe the posters. There are some kind of extracts, some kind of roadmaps, guidance.
They're infographics that provide different views onto the model. So there's and they're structured in the same way as the book. So there's the outcomes and benefits infographic. So like that's giving you show me a view of the KMM that focuses on outcomes and benefits. What do I get if I take my organization to maturity level 4? And then there's a culture view.
Yeah.
There are the famous specific practices mapping with all the practice names. There's the evolutionary change view. And so there's 4 posters, one for each of the main sections in the book. So 4 infographics providing those views. Then we have the triage tables poster, which provides a manual mechanism for determining the class of service based on the cost of delay of an item. And then we have the dependency management poster, which takes that further and says, okay, if you know the class of service for the customer request, and that request might have dependent requests that cascade through our organization, how should we treat those? How do we manage those dependencies? So that gives us 6 posters. Then there's a 7th one, which is the mapping of integrations to a number of other well-known methods, for example, CMMI 2.0. And that 7th poster is being launched next week. So that the posters cover different sections of the book, and they provide different views onto the information. And that's a really nice segue, I think, into the announcement we're making later today as we're recording this. Today we're announcing KMM Plus, the URL for which is kmm.plus. And this is our new KMM as a service, digital service. Really, it's envisaged in the first instance and our tier 1 registration. So the basic registration is envisaged as a replacement for an electronic book. We have no intent of publishing a Kindle version. We wanted to make the information accessible online, electronic. And we conceived the concept of KMM Plus, which is a digital service for KMM. And the base level service is all the book content accessed via those infographic posters that we were talking about. So you select the view that you want, say you're interested in outcomes, and you can zoom in on the poster, perhaps on level 4, and identify a specific outcome. And if you click on it, it brings up that section of the book, that content. And it's also quite clever if related material is spread, say, across 3 or 4 different chapters in the book. It can actually take those 3 or 4 different clips and stick them together so that you consume it as just the one document on the screen, so that you can consume KMM advice and guidance and consulting as an online service.
I imagine this scenario that you just said, I could familiarize myself with a book, right? But then being exposed to a situation or a question or like a challenge, I could have, quick way to find maybe the right term, the right practice, but also the cross references, right? So like what kind of impact is it going to have on culture or outcomes, if I start with practices or the other way around. So sounds like a hitchhiker guide to Kanban model.
Yeah. Actually, a really good analogy, the Hitchhiker's Guide. I hadn't thought of it, so thanks for that. Rather than have to wait perhaps 2 years for a third edition of the book to learn about the appraisal method or leadership, that type of material will become available in KMM Plus much earlier. So it's just it's a much better way of us interacting with the audience and with people who are using the Kanban method and the Kanban Maturity Model as a means for improving the working environment.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. I'm pretty sure we'll put all the links to all the things that we just mentioned. So, of course, the book itself, as you could hear in the paper version only, but also the posters and also the KMM Plus. Okay, David, I think that's a lot of things that we've just learned about Kanban Maturity Model. I hope it convinces some people to look into this huge body of knowledge. Those of you who maybe are familiar with the previous version also convinces to go for the new one in either the digital form that David just described or the book itself. Probably both have good use cases for different scenarios. So David, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I'm really happy to see that the KMM is evolving. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Radek.
Pamiętajcie, że podcast Kanban przy kawie dostępny jest również na Patronite. Możecie zostać dumnym patronem, patronką tego podcastu. Wszelkie informacje na patronite.pl/Kanban. Ostatnio miałem okazję naprawdę przymiłej rozmowy zdalnej, co prawda, ale oczywiście w dzisiejszych czasach to jest pewnie główna opcja, z jednym z najnowszych patronów. Bardzo fajna okazja do tego. Dajcie znać, jeśli patronat nie jest tym, co Wam odpowiada, to ja będę oczywiście wdzięczny również za polecenie tego podcastu, zwłaszcza, że w ostatnim czasie, kiedy Spotify opublikował chyba wszystkim użytkownikom listę najpopularniejszych utworów czy podcastów, których słuchali, no serce rosło, kiedy niektórzy z Was podzielili się właśnie tym, że Kanban przy kawie znalazł się wyjątkowo wysoko, a może nawet najwyżej w tych statystykach Waszych odsłuchań. To oczywiście bardzo motywuje do działania na przyszłość, także wielkie dzięki. Tyle wywiadu z Davidem Andersonem. Właściwie chyba każdy wywiad, zwłaszcza te wywiady anglojęzyczne, dotąd okraszałem jakimś komentarzem i z tym będzie bardzo podobnie. Właściwie co jest dla mnie takim, można powiedzieć, kluczowym przesłaniem z całej tej historii, którą David nam przedstawia? No, dla mnie przede wszystkim ważnym jest to stwierdzenie, że nasz kontekst firmowy, nasz kontekst kulturowy, biznesowy jest unikalny i stosowanie jakiegoś takiego bardzo ogólnikowego, abstrakcyjnego modelu, no, nie zawsze umocowuje do ludzi do tego, żeby czegoś spróbować, tak? Tak jak David opowiada, no dobrze, wprowadźmy sobie ograniczenie pracy w toku, ale no właśnie, na jakiej granularności zadań albo jakiego rodzaju miałby być to WIP limit, to już nie jest takie trywialne, od czego zacząć. Z drugiej strony, no, kochamy te rozwiązania, które są łatwe, dlatego że są podawane jak na tacy, a więc mówimy zrób dokładnie to i jak się zapytają Ciebie dlaczego, no to tak jak David zażartował, no bo David tak powiedział, może na jakimś konferencji czy szkoleniu, albo może tak stoi w książce. KMM jest takim właśnie konceptem, który trochę łączy te dwa podejścia. Z jednej strony mówimy, proszę, oto jest taki katalog rzeczy, możemy Ci troszkę pomóc, żeby zidentyfikować, na czym Ty i Twoja organizacja się nie sparzą, bo nie będzie to właśnie ten overreaching, ale z drugiej strony będzie to coś, co być może będzie tą tą zdrową dawką stresu, który też pozwoli Ci zobaczyć, jak organizacja na pewne zmiany reaguje. Myślę, że tutaj mogą skorzystać nie tylko ci, którzy chcą w ogóle, można powiedzieć, zgłębiać stosowanie metody Kanban czy konkretnych jej praktyk, ale w ogóle wszyscy ci, którzy borykają się z czymś, co im nie działa w organizacji, tak? A więc dlaczego nie działa nam ten Scrum, dlaczego nie działa nam ten Kanban, dlaczego nam nie działa, nie wiem, Management 3.0, cokolwiek, co byście tutaj mogli włączyć z takiego narzędziownika właśnie, często kojarzonego z tą zwinnością, to jest właśnie kwestia tej dojrzałości organizacyjnej, tej kultury, tego, jak organizacja jest cierpliwa, co organizacja nagradza, co organizacja widzi, w ogóle też postrzega jako sukces, tak? David też mówi o tym qualities of management, tak? A więc jakby jakiego, można powiedzieć, profilu mamy w danej organizacji też przywództwo, czy nawet taki tradycyjny management. Tak jak słyszeliście, pod koniec wywiadu David opisał również te ciekawe infografiki, takie postery, które są dołączone do modelu. Je możecie pobrać, tak jak wspominałem, ze strony internetowej. One też wchodzą w skład tej aplikacji webowej KMM Plus. KMM Plus jest czymś, czego będziecie mogli, a przynajmniej niektórzy z Was spróbować, poużywać w praktyce dzięki, można powiedzieć, nagrodom. Wielkie podziękowania dla Ani Radzikowskiej, która jest product managerką tego konceptu KMM. Z Anią przygotowaliśmy dla Was taką niespodziankę, nagrodę. Pierwsze 5 osób, które napisze do mnie albo bezpośrednio na moich kanałach społecznościowych, albo na kanałach społecznościowych podcastu, to może być strona internetowa, to może być Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, dostanie 3-miesięczny dostęp do aplikacji KMM Plus, a więc będziecie mieli, można powiedzieć, tak jak sobie tam zażartowaliśmy, taki przewodnik autostopem po Kanbanie. To całkiem sprawnie działa w przeglądarkach mobilnych, jesteście w stanie sobie tam kliknąć i zobaczyć szybko, czy opis tej definicji, czy ten kawałek książki, który to opisuje, czy właśnie jakieś referencje do innych obszarów z KMM, a więc można powiedzieć takie skróty do może innych stron. Do tego serdecznie zapraszamy. Piszcie, dajcie znać, rozdystrybuujemy takie dostępy. Natomiast wszystkich zapraszamy do tego, żeby się z tym zapoznać, bo wydaje się to bardzo ciekawa koncepcja, jako taka właśnie, można powiedzieć, niestandardowa elektroniczna wersja książki, ale naprawdę taki interaktywny przewodnik. Zresztą David gdzieś tam w rozmowie jeszcze po wywiadzie opowiedział mi, że oczywiście plany są, można powiedzieć, ewolucyjne, a więc być może pojawią się jakieś dodatkowe opcje, czy to materiałów wideo, czy może dostępów do odpowiednich narzędzi wspierających Kanban, czy może w ogóle takiej koncepcji marketplace, ale tutaj nie chcę tych koncepcji zdradzać, bo pozwólmy się dać zaskoczyć. Moi drodzy, tyle na dziś. Dziękuję za wysłuchanie tego odcinka. Mam nadzieję, że może skłoniło Was to właśnie do nawet lektury starej wersji, może pomyślenia o zakupie sobie na święta w prezencie, może Amazon jeszcze zdąży, nowej wersji, a może właśnie zapoznanie się z tą wersją elektroniczną, czy w ogóle zgłębienia tego, czym KMM jest. Szkolenia z tego też dla zainteresowanych na pewno pojawią się w ofercie na lineagile.ninja na wiosnę 2021, bo te szkolenia też już od dłuższego czasu odbywają się również w formie zdalnej i w takiej formie rozproszonej na kilka sesji, więc to może być dla niektórych z Was ciekawe. Jako że ten odcinek pojawia się w grudniu 2020, szalonego roku, bez wątpienia, to życzę Wam wszystkiego dobrego na święta, wypoczynku, chciałem powiedzieć bez lockdownu, nie wiem co to będzie, myślę, że nikt z nas nie wie. No i roku 2021 dobrego. Wszyscy mówimy, 2020 daj już spokój. Jesteśmy realistami. To, że się kończy sprint, chciałem powiedzieć rok. to nie kończy niczego. Pewnie będziemy się zmagać z tymi wszystkimi i wyzwaniami, i zmianami, które no może wszyscy postrzegamy pewnie jako tymczasowe, a pewnie odcisną się mocniej na naszej rzeczywistości. Więc słuchajcie, dużo zdrowia, dużo energii, żeby sobie z tymi zmianami radzić, bo w nowym roku to na pewno się jeszcze przyda. Do usłyszenia w 2021. Pozdrawiam, mówił Radek Orszewski.